City planning is so important to the proper functioning of a city, something we often take for granted. On this channel, I'm seeking to review city planning, figuring out just what's right and what's wrong about the ways our cities have been built. In January of 2022, Australia's then opposition leader Anthony Albanese promised the state of New South Wales that, if his party of Labor was elected to power, he would promise $500 million towards funding of a high-speed rail between the state's biggest city, Sydney, and its second biggest city, Newcastle.
My vision is for high-speed rail that runs from Brisbane to Melbourne, up and down the east coast of Australia, overcoming the tyranny of distance that's held regions back.
Well, here we are now, in May 2022, a week after Anthony Albanese was elected the 31st Prime Minister of Australia. As per his election promise, it looks like Sydney will be getting high-speed rail. But when? Where? And most importantly, is this project actually going to prove beneficial to the residents of New South Wales? Or is it little more than an empty election promise? Keep watching to find out more. Welcome to Building Beautifully. Sydney is a massive city, one that is growing endlessly. The city itself is already bigger than the entire country of New Zealand, and as Sydney grows, it'll run out of space. It's inevitable. People will need to start living in nearby cities. Newcastle, Wollongong, Goulburn, Orange, Canberra, and so many more. With the arrival of COVID and the advent of the virtual age, of working from home, of going into your workplace once a week, perhaps even once a month, more and more people are retreating to rural towns. A record 43,000 Australians moved to rural towns in 2020 during COVID, realizing they didn't need to live near work anymore. Cheaper living, an escape from the busy grind of cities, peace and quiet. It's suddenly looking very appealing. But that's a problem. These rural places have historically been very small and therefore difficult to get to by public transport. So, with density finally increasing in these rural centres, how will people get to the economic, cultural, and population heart of their state, Sydney? Enter high-speed rail. High-speed rail is generally defined as rail upon which trains travel faster than 250 kilometers an hour. Countries like China, Japan, France, and the United Kingdom have high-speed rail, and it has transformed these countries. Anthony Albanese has announced that he will build high-speed rail between Sydney and Newcastle, New South Wales' second biggest city, with stops in the Central Coast, New South Wales' fourth biggest city. We're not quite sure yet where the stops will go, but according to the Sydney Morning Herald, there could be stops in Newcastle, Wyong, Gosford, Epping, Parramatta, and the Campbelltown Macarthur area. Travel from Sydney to Gosford could go from almost an hour and a half right now to just 30 minutes with high-speed rail. And from Sydney to Newcastle could go from 2.5 hours right now to just 45 minutes. This speed is unprecedented. For the first time in Sydney's history, people could genuinely live in Newcastle and yet still commute and work in Sydney. Clearly, the project has the potential to transform Sydney, the Central Coast, and Newcastle. Right now, far too much of New South Wales is concentrated in Sydney. 66% of our population lives in this city alone. I like to think of it as the table and chairs model. Sydney is a massive table in the centre, taking up so much space. The chairs are the smaller towns of the state. Newcastle, Wollongong, Dubbo, Tamworth, Wagga Wagga, and more. Despite all these towns, most people rely and live on this one massive table. And that's a problem. This is how New South Wales is designed, and believe me, that's not praise. The constant urban sprawl of Sydney is not a good thing. Congestion increases, access to services decreases, and at worst, a greatly divided, socio-economically segregated city forms. This is a city in the grips of a housing and renting crisis, one where supply is simply not keeping up with demand, one that will inevitably run out of space, and that has to stop. We have to look to the regions, and we do that with high-speed rail. High-speed rail leads to reverse sprawl. It moves the sprawl from the outskirts of a city to completely different cities. Why live in the expensive outskirts of the hills, of the new and dense Bradfield city, of the far western suburbs of Penrith, when you can live in Newcastle, Gosford, perhaps even Orange, Wollongong, Goulburn, Bathurst, Canberra, if and when high speed is extended? These are cities that are hours away by car right now, and practically unreachable by rail. But with high-speed rail, even if you work in Sydney, even if you have family in Sydney, even if you fear leaving the city behind, you can move to the country and still get to the city easily whenever the need arises, within hours, if not faster. High-speed rail will finally allow people to live away from Sydney. Being far away from a major city will no longer be a problem, because a major city will be just a high-speed train ride away. The table and chairs model can slowly be abolished, replaced with what I like to call the Olympic rings model, a much more evenly spread out population, one that is linked up with one another, not all centered within one dense, congested urban sprawl of a city. Subsequently, these cities can blossom. Rural towns like Wyong, like Goulburn, can go from small places on the edges of oblivion, merely an afterthought in the minds of politicians and citizens alike, no offense to any current residents, to booming hubs of activity, of development and growth at the gateway of the fastest route between cities on the east coast of Australia. With the proper planning, one can hope these areas don't turn into the drab suburbia of Sydney, but rather lively, inspired towns, places where people actually want to live. There's opportunity to be had here. With the proper planning, that is. Proper planning won't be an issue though. There'll be plenty of time for that. Because, unfortunately, high-speed rail is likely decades off from arriving in New South Wales. Ambitious plans have suggested high-speed rail linking the three capital cities of Australia's east coast, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. This would transform towns along this corridor for all the reasons I've explained already, while helping to demolish the tables and chairs model in the states of Victoria and Queensland. But it will be expensive, and it won't arrive for a very long time. Indeed, the Sydney Morning Herald estimates it will take 2 to 3 decades to build the whole network. An optimistic estimate is 2040, a more realistic one is 2050, and at worst it could be as late as 2060. Honestly, it was bold for Anthony Albanese to go to the election with the promise of high-speed rail that he did. The inner cynic in me says that very few people probably actually believed his promise was nothing more than an empty pledge aimed at winning voters in the region over, especially given how many have tried to do just that before him. Hey, don't get me wrong, I'm happy, relieved that Albo won. I'm just not so sure high-speed rail will be coming anytime soon. But that's okay, because even if development of a proposal doesn't start tomorrow, it will start. It's inevitable. New South Wales needs to change the lay of its land, and this is how it does that. This will transform how people get around our great state. It will transform corridors. It will drive development and change the ways in which Australians live. It is many, many, many years off, but it could very well be the gateway to a brighter future for the east coast of Australia.
If you like this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.